Hey DawgNation, I'm Brandon Adams. I'm here with Connor Riley. You can obviously see we are in Athens. Just behind me is the Buttsmere Heritage Hall. Those are the athletic offices of the University of Georgia. And no doubt, it's in the load right now as Georgia continues its practice, and that was supposed to be the story of the day. That's why we're here to cover that practice. Georgia Coach Kirby Smart expected to speak to reporters a little bit later on, but in the midst of that practice, a couple dogs noticed not on the field. Outside linebackers Robert Beal and Brenton Cox. We later have found out, as Mike Griffith has reported for DawgNation.com, that both Beal and Cox were arrested shortly after 3:30 p.m. this afternoon on possession of marijuana charges. They have both been released just after 4 p.m., but this is obviously big news for a Georgia program who's dealt with more of this than certainly Georgia Coach Kirby Smart would have liked, and obviously Georgia fans probably a bit tired of this now as well. Cox and Beal will become the 5th and 6th players for the Bulldogs to be arrested thus far this offseason. Now, if you're a regular listener or viewer to DawgNation Daily, you know that for the most part, the last big story that we covered on this front with Tyler Simmons and Tyreek Stevenson were involved in what was called a chaotic scene, a little bit of a scuffle in a bar in downtown Athens. For me, that wasn't as big of a deal, not the kind of thing that I said, wasn't really all that scandalized about. This, because of the adding number of guys who've gotten in trouble, and because of the fact that this comes on an afternoon in which Georgia had a practice scheduled, for me, this is a little more, I don't want to say alarming necessarily, but it does raise more eyebrows of exactly what was going on with Beal and with Brenton Cox, and exactly what's going on with the Georgia program overall. I think this is one of those things that we'll know more about the scenario when we get more details from the police. I'll invite you to stay close to DawgNation.com for a lot more on that. And we'll also take some reaction on this here as well. Now, one of the topics that's going to come up, it's frankly probably out of bounds for a show like this or a website like this to even cover, is what is the nature of the criminality of possession of marijuana now? I think at last count, 10 states have legalized the possession of marijuana. I'm pretty sure that in all those states that possession is legal for people over the age of 21, which is definitely not the case for Brenton Cox and likely not the case for Robert Beal either. So this is likely, I guess, criminal in any state in the country, even the ones in which marijuana has been legalized. But obviously different people have different feelings on that substance right now. The one thing that dog fans are probably more united on, though, is they don't like seeing their players' names show up in the police blotter, especially in the case of, Robert Beal's a guy we saw come on last year and have a few moments for the Dogs a year ago that made you excited and probably still excited about his outlook for 2018, or I should say 2019. And there's no doubt that Brenton Cox is among the most physically gifted players on the entire Georgia roster. And if you're looking for one of those candidates for a breakout year this upcoming season, Cox would certainly seem to be as much of one of those as you could possibly get. So the news itself is disappointing. The names involved maybe make it more so. And for Georgia fans, a lot to react to. As DawgNation has reported, Brenton Cox and Robert Beal absent from practice this afternoon, arrested by the University of Georgia police, then booked into Athens Clark County Jail before being released shortly after 4 p.m. In fact, we're live on Facebook right now. Let me pull up here and get a few of your comments. We'll get a chance to react to this. We'll also give Connor Riley, who's with me right now, a chance to speak on this a bit too, if we can figure out a way to hold the phone. Normally we have a lot of fancy video equipment. Today, not quite so fancy, but nonetheless, we want to be live with you and have a chance to talk about that. Adam Bartholomew really kind of cuts to the chase of what I think the most important issue is. He says, I want to know how they got caught in the middle of the afternoon. And for me, like I said, I'm not going to get into the, what is weed in 2019? Is that a big deal or not? I'm not going to get into that. But being arrested for it during the middle of the afternoon, at least based on my understanding of the situation right now, seems a little weird, and it makes you wonder if the practice, if the attempt at practice was as focused as it needs to be. For me, that's the most concerning part of this, and I don't think it's the kind of thing that Cox and Beal can't come back from, not in any way, shape, form. But this is a mistake of a pretty large order to be mixed up with this on an afternoon when Georgia was supposed to have a practice. Trip Mitchell says, I bet it was a stupid low amount. It was less than an ounce. Virtually all these arrests are, they're always described as less than an ounce. I'm assuming an ounce must be some sort of category. Otherwise,
it's very small.
Yeah, that's very small, Connor says. As you would imagine. Square PA doesn't know a ton about that. Everett Joyner says, what do current recruits think of it? And, I think that you're going to have a spectrum of opinions when it comes to current recruits on stuff like this. Obviously, for a lot of parents, there is a concern about when they send their kid off to school, no matter what school they go to, how well taken care of are they going to be, and how good is the program going to be at allowing those players to avoid trouble. There's also the sense of, hey, let's be careful that we don't run afoul of the law every time we step out of our apartment or our dorm. So there's a couple different ways you can kind of think about that just a bit. Nicole House says, you're on a free ride to college right now and then also getting in trouble. And obviously there is going to be some frustration. There are going to be some disappointment on the part of Georgia fans because this looks like the kind of error that was that could have easily been avoided, the kind of mistake that could have easily been avoided. But as it stands right now, Brenton Cox and Robert Beal have not avoided that. They have run afoul of the law here today, adding to a list that is too long for many Georgia fans thus far this offseason. William and Elaine Morgan says, just keep making excuses for these kids, no character. They know exactly what they're doing. And listen, I understand where the frustration, the temptation to come down hard on these guys are, and I no doubt bet when we hear from Kirby Smart later on, if he does indeed speak to the media as he's scheduled to do, my guess is he'll come down pretty hard. He came down pretty hard last week, or whenever it was, a few days ago, on the subject of Tyreek Stevenson and Tyler Simmons. So you'll probably hear some stern words from Smart on this, and the words that Smart speaks behind the scenes likely be even more stern than that. So I understand where the frustration's coming from. It is certainly not a good look for the program, really poor optics to have on a day in which Georgia is trying to. We had a chance to see this with our own eyes. A very intense practice, a lot of spirit, a lot of pep. To see two guys not there because of marijuana charges is, unfortunately for these two players, a really bad look for them individually. And for the Georgia program, it makes Georgia, at least on this day, look less than fully focused and fully determined to go out and repeat as SEC East champs in 2019 and take that next step as a program. They'll definitely have some image issues they'll have to deal with coming off a day like this. Walt Taylor says the Athens Police Department is pressuring Kirby. Listen, it's very easy to want to blame law enforcement in a situation like this. Strict law enforcement, some people would say, in Athens, Clarke County. This is the university police initially involved in this based on the reporting from Mike Griffith at DawgNation.com, and obviously the booking facility then becomes Athens, Clarke County. We'll have to wait on more details of exactly how it was determined that Cox and Beal were alleged to be in violation of the law to know more about the specific circumstances of this. But obviously for a lot of Georgia fans, there's going to be some frustration in this kind of stuff. James Hollis says outside the Deep South, marijuana arrests don't happen. As I said before, there are a growing number of states where marijuana has been decriminalized, legal in certain situations. I think in most cases, though, that's going to be for people older than the age of 21, though. Jacob McMillan says more arrests, and obviously that's the other big thing that kind of hangs over a discussion like this. The fact that it's now, I guess, 6 since the beginning of the offseason when you start adding all these things together, and that's one of the things that's going to be a little concerning to some, is the fact that it looks like a growing number getting involved on this. Jason Glossier says, I agree, they don't look focused winning, they look focused on getting a good buzz, and as I said before, that's kind of my concern. For the most part, I don't try to, sound the alarms and fan too much flames of hysteria over the occasional arrest. I think that, being an 18, 19, 20-year-old, that's part of growing up in some respects. A lot of people can come back from that. But the nature of this one feels a little bit different to me than some of the things that Georgia players have been alleged to have been involved with thus far this offseason. Given the fact that in the middle of the afternoon, and given the fact this is supposed to be a practice day, this feels like a mess that Georgia and the players involved themselves could have potentially avoided. Gary Strickland says the point breaking the law. A lot of comments coming in here. Jeff Tatum reminded folks that it's Robert Beal and Brenton Cox who were involved in this situation, alleged to have been in possession of marijuana. Zach Smith says athletes that spend 10 plus years smashing into each other should be able to use a harmless substance, and that's obviously getting back in the realm of the, changing belief and behavior when it comes to marijuana around the country. It's not really my place one way or another to say if that's right or not. It's only my place to point out that it is currently illegal in Georgia, and my guess is that Kirby Smart privately, his advice to his players is to follow the laws that exist for the state of Georgia. If you think the law is unfair or wrong in comparison with some other states do, there's a process for changing that law, but that's not the law that's in place for Georgia right now. But I certainly understand that's going to be a very popular and common comment when it comes to this kind of stuff. Levante Peterson says, come on, it's not that serious. And I understand where Levante's coming from. A lot of people are going to say that. But I'll ask Connor Riley this. Am I wrong for saying that it seems more serious when it's 3:30 in the afternoon, more so than midnight on a Saturday night, where, you expect more likely then to hear about kids having a good time and doing some stuff. The fact that it's 3:30 in the afternoon on a practice day is the part of this story, based on what we know so far, that stands out to me as, ooh, that's the detail that jumps out. I mean, you're a lot younger than me. How do you react to all that?
I think it's important to distinguish they were arrested for possession and not smoking, and we don't know when they had smoked it or not. They could have been just driving in their car and gotten pulled over for it.
That's
I think
a good point.
We have to wait for the details to come out here. You know, they could have been in the room, and the room could have been searched.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's certainly a fair point.
Yeah. So as far as a big deal, it's. I mean, in the eyes of the law, it's an insignificant amount of weed. It's less than 1 ounce. I mean, really, I think the bigger problem, if you want to even have a problem with this, is just they happen to get caught with it, which, it's a certain amount of negligence on their part. And second of all, it is the 6th arrest since the start of March, and that's really probably where I think more people have a problem with
and
this.
On a more practical level than that, Georgia gets, about 15 of these spring practices. Beal and certainly Brenton Cox have a chance to be very significant contributors to those practices, and they're not at practice today. So more so than anything else, as Connor said, the legality of this is probably not that big of a deal one way or another, but from a football standpoint, which is, let's face it, on this program and on this website, that's what we care the most about. From a football standpoint, 2 of your expected contributors are not there right now. Cox and Beal were not able to practice this afternoon, and for Kirby Smart, who's talked a lot over the course of this spring about havoc plays and getting after the quarterback more, these are 2 of the guys that are going to be given that responsibility on the field this season. So to have them missing from practice is obviously a inconvenience I'm sure that Smart would rather not go through. Brenda Williamson-Conley says 6 times, really, obviously adding all these together up. And listen, that's one of those things that, some opposing fan bases and maybe some, national media are going to try to bludgeon Georgia over the head with, saying, what's going on at Georgia, what's wrong with Georgia. I think for the most part, when you look at the specific instances for most of these events, and I guess on some of these we're still waiting for details, none of this individually necessarily adds up to be anything all that scandalous or all that egregious. But for Kirby Smart, who says that, hey, we want to, be able to go downtown to Athens, not get in trouble, or basically be able to exist in this university community without, running afoul of the law, there's, obviously a concern for him there on that. They would rather not have this happen.
I have to ask a $100,000 question.
Please.
Has Kirby Smart lost control of this program?
Yeah, obviously that goes back to the humorous meme of the Mark Richt days. And it does bring to mind the fact that Georgia, I forget the total number, but, Georgia dealt with a number of player arrests before the 2008 season, which Georgia entered as preseason number 1. So, to a certain extent, it's easy to draw a parallel on that just a bit. I don't happen to think that those player arrests ultimately hurt Georgia on the field that much that season. I think there were some other things going on. But, Connor, you've written about this, the fact that, there was a sort of internet meme created around Mark Richt in a way that it doesn't seem to exist that way for Kirby Smart. And you've talked about your reasons for why you think that is.
Yeah, I think a big thing, if Georgia wins the SEC this year and are bound for the college football playoff on December 8th, no one's ever going to talk about this arrest for Brenton Cox and Robert Beal. But, with Rick, there were some down years.
Yeah.
I think 4 straight years they're ranked top 10 in the Fulmer Cup standings, which are essentially, they keep track of where programs, or how many players are arrested per program across the country. And, Georgia was in the top 10 4 straight years. In that 4th year in 2010, they went 6-6, I believe. So, it's a combination of guys getting in trouble and not winning. So, as long as Georgia continues to win, I don't think this is a huge problem for the Georgia program. But if, this does start detracting from results in the field and Kirby's not able, I will say one thing that to hedge people making a big deal about this, it's a spring practice in April and not, the week of the Vanderbilt game or the Notre Dame game come the fall.
Not a good look for the program.
No.
Optics-wise, this is before Brandon Burnham brings up the notion of, he says, I was a Division II basketball player and I got breaks from the police all the time. Connor's a guy that was, lived in Athens, was a student here. What do you make of what can sometimes be described by outsiders of the city and of the university community as very aggressive policing? What do you make of that? Because that's a conversation that comes up anytime something like this happens. Certainly, it does to me seem a little uncommon to have a possession arrest like this. You don't seem to hear a lot about that.
Right.
What do you make of the aggressive policing that we sometimes see?
I don't feel comfortable commenting on aggressive policing. I will say I find it interesting that they were arrested for 1 ounce of marijuana, so for less than 1 ounce of marijuana. So I think either, maybe they had been tipped off by someone and they had something in their dorm room and the dorm room was being searched.
Yeah.
And it's what they happened to find.
Just even the idea of a dorm room being searched is going to sound weird to some people, given the fact that.
I mean, that's not uncommon. I mean, didn't this happen a few years ago with Roquan Smith in his room? His room had been searched and they had found like less than an ounce of weed in there. I mean, there are RAs that are very strict about this, and there are some that are not. And again, I think the important thing here is to wait on all the details and wait for the police report to come out and find out what exactly went on that led to the arrest of Cox and Beal.
Yeah, so that's the situation for now. We'll hear from Kirby Smart on this a little bit later on. There is obviously going to be more coverage of this at DawgNation.com, but 2 more Georgia players added to the police blotter thus far this offseason, and it happens on a day in which Georgia practice is taking place behind me right now. We'll have more on this tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. DawgNation Daily, here from Athens throughout the rest of the evening. So stay close to the DawgNation video channels and DawgNation.com. We'll have more on this information as it becomes available, but to a recap, this afternoon, Georgia outside linebackers Robert Beal, Brenton Cox arrested on a possession of marijuana charge, released from Athens Clark County Police custody shortly after 4 p.m. More details to come. Thanks for being with us here on DawgNation.